In the world cloaked in Arya's quiet velvet, a name was spoken only in whispers, a name that could curdle the costliest cream and silence the loudest laughter. Selina Northwood was the wife of magnate Preston Northwood, a woman sculpted from ice and arrogance. Her presence at the restaurant was not a visit, but a judgment. The staff trembled, chefs sweated, and managers prayed. For years, her reign of silent terror was absolute, her power impregnable. Everyone feared the millionaire's wife until a new waitress arrived, a girl whose name no one bothered learning and who alone revealed the ridiculous, fragile truth hidden beneath the diamonds and disdain. Aria was not just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth. Located on a discreet, ivy-clad corner in a city that worshipped money, it was the place where deals were sealed with a handshake over a $500 steak and reputations were made or unmade with the tilt of a wine glass. The very air seemed filtered, smelling of old leather, truffle oil, and the faint, sweet perfume of generational power. The staff moved with the silent, practiced grace of dancers, with one cardinal rule instilled from day one. The customer is always right, especially when they are wrong, and no customer was more right than Selina Northwood. She was neither loud nor ostentatious. Her brand of cruelty was a far more refined poison. It was in the languid, critical gaze that swept over a newly set table, a look that could find a microscopic flaw on a fork's tine from 10 feet away. It was in the subtle sigh of disappointment she emitted after tasting a wine, a sound that could cost a sommelier their job. It was in the way she never ever used a staff member's name, referring to them only with a cutting U or a sharp snap of her fingers. Her husband, Preston Northwood, was an industry titan, a man whose name was etched on buildings and whose decisions could move the market. Yet at Aria, he was simply an accessory, a handsome, well-dressed prop who sat beside his wife, nodding absently as she systematically dismantled the confidence of whoever was assigned to their table. He seemed either oblivious to his wife's casual malevolence or simply too weary to care. The staff had a name for the corner booth she always demanded: the guillotine. The unfortunate server assigned to that table knew their tips would be non-existent, and their morale would be in tatters by the end of service. On one particularly brutal Tuesday, a young waiter named Kevin had been reduced to a trembling mess because Selina claimed the bubbles in her San Pellegrino were insufficiently vigorous. She made him open 4 different bottles at the table until one met her unknown standard, all while maintaining a look of profound, devastating disappointment. Kevin resigned the next day. It was into this lion's den that Nina Riley walked. Nina was 24, with a quiet watchfulness in her deep brown eyes and a calm demeanor often mistaken for naivete. She was not new to the service industry. Having worked through college in less glamorous establishments, she had a knack for reading people and an almost preternatural ability to remain unflappable. She needed the job at Aria. The pay was legendary if she could survive the clientele. Her new manager, Mr. Coleman, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a stomach full of ulcers, gave her the tour with a weary solemnity. "The rules are simple, Riley," he said softly. "Anticipate, accommodate, and above all, be invisible. Your goal is for clients to have such a seamless experience they forget you exist." He paused. His eyes flickered toward the guillotine. "And if you're ever assigned table 12, God help you." Nina learned about Selina Northwood through the staff's fearful whispered gossip. Leo, a veteran server with a cynical wit, updated her during a lull. "She's not a customer, she's a predator," he said, polishing a wine glass with furious precision. "She comes here to feel powerful by making us feel small. Apparently, she comes from very old money. She spent her summers in the Hamptons. She knows everyone who matters. She's untouchable." Nina just listened, absorbing the information without comment. She had dealt with difficult patrons before: arrogant students, angry drunks, condescending academics. How much worse could one woman be? She found out 2 weeks after starting. It was a Thursday evening. The restaurant vibrated with the low hum of silent power. Mr. Coleman approached her, his face pale. "Riley," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly would trigger the apocalypse. "The Northwoods are here. You're up, table 12. A collective sigh of sympathy rippled through nearby staff. Leo gave her a look that was part pity, part morbid curiosity. Nina simply smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and picked up 2 leather-bound menus. "All right," she said, her voice calm. "Table 12. Approaching the booth, she saw them. Preston was on his phone, looking bored, and Selina watched Nina's approach like a hawk watching a field mouse. She was impeccably dressed in a navy dress that probably cost more than Nina's car. Her hair was a perfect blonde helmet, and her face was a mask of placid superiority. But it was her pale blue eyes, cold and utterly devoid of warmth, that made Nina's stomach clench. Nina had never seen this woman in her life. Yet, as Selina turned her head with a flash of something sharp and dismissive in her expression, a strange, dissonant chord of familiarity struck Nina, so faint and deep it was almost imperceptible. She pushed the feeling away. It was time to perform. "Good evening," Nina said, her voice steady and clear. "Welcome to Aria. May I offer you something to drink this evening?" Selina did not respond. She just stared at Nina for a long, uncomfortable moment, her eyes cataloging every detail. Finally, her voice spoke, a hidden, low purr somehow more intimidating than a shout. "We'll have the usual." She did not specify what the usual was. It was a test, the first of many. Nina did not flinch. She had done her homework, relentlessly questioning Leo. "Of course," Nina replied smoothly. "A bottle of Chateau Neuf Toup, 2012 for Mr. Northwood, and sparkling water with a thin lemon slice, no ice for you, Mrs. Northwood. I'll bring it right over." A flicker of surprise, almost annoyance, crossed Selina's face before the mask of indifference returned. Nina turned and walked away, feeling the weight of that cold blue gaze on her back the entire time. The first test was passed, but as she prepared the drinks, that nagging sense of familiarity returned. It wasn't exactly the face. It was something else. A posture. A phrase. She couldn't quite pinpoint it, but it was there. A ghost of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. The service that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Selina Northwood did not operate with open aggression, but with 1,000 small cuts. Each interaction was designed to unnerve, to create an error where none existed. When Nina presented the wine to Preston, who barely looked up from his phone, Selina interrupted. "Let me see it," she commanded, extending a slender, ringed hand. Nina handed her the bottle. Selina examined the label as if searching for a forgery. 2012. An adequate year, I suppose. She waved her hand dismissively. "Continue." As Nina poured a small sample for Preston, Selina watched her hands with narrowed eyes. "Are you certain you know how? You seem to hesitate. Don't spill on Preston's suit." "I am quite steady, Mrs. Northwood," Nina replied calmly, pouring a perfect measure without a single tremor. Preston swirled the glass, smelled, and sipped, nodding briefly in approval. Nina filled his glass and then turned to take their order. "I trust you know the specials," Selina said without glancing at the menu. "Recite them, and do not falter." Nina listed the evening's specials flawlessly, detailing the ingredients and preparation of each dish from memory with a professional, even tone. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. "Good," Selina said, finally opening her menu. "The tableside deboned sole, and if you make a mess, I will return it along with my dry cleaning bill." She snapped the menu shut. "Preston will have the steak, medium rare. If I see a hint of gray, the chef will hear from me directly." "Of course," Nina said, noting the order. "An excellent choice." She retreated to the kitchen, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly the further she moved from the table. The chef, a robust Frenchman named Antoine, saw the order come in for table 12 and gave her a sympathetic glance. "The dragon lady," he grumbled. "Be strong, ma chérie." "I'm trying," Nina said with a small smile. Throughout the meal, the test continued. The bread basket was placed a millimeter too far left. Water glasses were not refilled with the silent, psychic speed she demanded. The butter, she claimed, was 1 degree too cold. For every perceived slight, she would not raise her voice. She would simply stop speaking. She would fix Nina with that glacial stare and wait, letting the uncomfortable silence hang in the air until Nina identified and corrected the issue. It was during the main course when the strange sense of familiarity struck Nina again. This time, harder. She was expertly deboning the sole at a gueridon beside the table. A delicate, high-pressure task. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath when a fish was deboned for Selina Northwood. As she worked, Selina spoke with Preston, complaining about a charity gala she had attended. Honestly, the entire event was utterly provincial. Her voice dripped with scorn. You could tell half the women there rented their dresses, and Beatrice Langdon had the audacity to wear the same Cartier necklace she wore last spring. So terribly common was her pronunciation of the word common. She clipped the end, a slight, almost imperceptible trace that seemed utterly out of place with her polished transatlantic accent. It was the type of accent acquired after years of elocution lessons designed to erase any hint of a regional dialect. But for a fraction of a second, a crack had appeared in the facade. and a different sound had slipped through, a rougher, sharper, southern sound. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us continue sharing more narratives like it, please consider donating to Stories of Black Women. Your support ensures we can keep bringing these powerful tales to life. Thank you. Nina's hands faltered for a fraction of a second, the deboning knife scraping against the platter. Selena's head swiveled toward her. "Is there a problem?" Her voice was dangerously soft. "No, Mrs. Northwood, not at all," Nina said, instantly recovering. She finished her work, plated the fish beautifully, and set it before her. "Your soul." Selena inspected it, her fork prodding the delicate white flesh. Finding no fault, she gave a dry, dissatisfied nod and took a bite. As Nina cleared the plates later, Preston, who had been silent for most of the meal, finally spoke to her. "The steak was perfect. Thank you." He offered a brief, tired smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Northwood," Nina responded. Selena shot her husband a look that could freeze fire. "Don't encourage them, Preston. It only leads to familiarity." The rest of the meal passed in a similar state of cold tension. They declined dessert. When Nina presented the check, Selena scrutinized every item minutely. Then she produced her black American Express card. When Nina returned with the receipt to sign, she watched as Selena, deliberately slowly, drew a thick line through the tip amount and wrote a firm, undeniable $0. It was no surprise. No one received a tip from Selena Northwood. Her payment was that you were, for now, still employed. As they rose to leave, Selena paused and looked directly at Nina one last time. "You're new here?" It wasn't a question. "You lasted longer than the last one. Don't let it go to your head." Without another word, she swept out of the restaurant, Preston following like a ship's tender. Nina stood by the empty table, her mind buzzing. It wasn't the insults or the lack of tip that bothered her. It was that accent, that out-of-place syllable, and something else too. A memory was stirring in the deep recesses of her mind. A memory of a hot summer day, the smell of sizzling bacon, and a loud, brassy voice complaining about customers. A voice that sounded eerily like Selena Northwood's, but stripped of all its expensive polish. She shook her head, trying to clear it. It was impossible. Selena Northwood was old money, a society queen. The woman in her fragmented memory was someone entirely different. But the seed of curiosity had been planted, and Nina Riley wasn't the type to leave a mystery unsolved. The days following her first encounter with Selena Northwood were filled with a growing obsession for Nina. During her shifts, she was the model employee, efficient, polite, and invisible. But internally, her mind was a whirlwind, constantly replaying the night, searching for clues, the way Selena held her fork, the dismissive flick of her wrist. That one mispronounced word, common. She started asking Leo more questions, phrasing them casually so as not to arouse suspicion. "So, what's the story with the Northwoods?" she asked one afternoon as they folded napkins. "Leo, you said she's old money." "That's the legend," Leo said, adjusting a napkin into a perfect bishop's mitre. "Her family, the Beaumonts, are said to be one of the city's founding families. Railroads, shipping, all that. She was a society debutante, went to the best schools, married Preston, straight out of Vassar. It was the merger of the century, his new money and her old name. They say her family estate is a registered historical landmark." Nina frowned. "The Beaumonts? I've never heard of them." "They're not flashy," Leo shrugged. "Old money doesn't need to be. They keep to themselves. That's why she's so haughty. She thinks people like us are a different species." This polished story didn't fit the crack Nina had perceived. An old money individual wouldn't have a trace of a southern accent to suppress. It didn't make sense. So Nina took her investigation online. Her initial searches were fruitless. Selena Northwood yielded hundreds of glossy photos from charity galas and society pages. There she was, serenely smiling beside politicians, artists, and fellow billionaires. Her biography in these articles was always the same vague, impressive summary. Daughter of the reclusive Beaumont family, Vassar graduate, philanthropist, and trendsetter. There were no candid shots or personal stories, nothing before her grand entrance into society as Preston Northwood's fiancée 20 years ago. It was as if she had emerged from nowhere, fully formed, dressed in designer clothes and dripping with disdain. Searching Selena Beaumont was even more of a dead end. The Beaumonts were indeed reclusive, so reclusive they seemed to have no digital footprint at all. No family photos, no business listings, nothing. It was suspiciously clean, as if it had been erased. Nina started paying closer attention whenever the Northwoods came in. She began volunteering to serve table 12, much to Mr. Coleman's bewildered relief. Each time, she subjected herself to Selena's torturous silence, but she was no longer just enduring it. She was studying. She noticed things. Selena had a small, silvery scar on her left wrist just above her diamond bracelet, a scar that looked like an old burn, perhaps from a hot pan or a stove. It was a working person's scar, not a socialite's. She also had a habit of drumming her lacquered nails on the table in a quick, impatient rhythm. Tap, tap, tappity, tap. A nervous, restless energy that seemed at odds with her carefully composed, serene exterior. One evening, Selena was complaining about the summer heat. "This city is simply unbearable in August," she sighed to her lunch companion, a woman named Beatrice Langdon, who regarded Selena with a mixture of admiration and rivalry. "Preston and I escaped to the vineyard, thank goodness. I can't stand being sticky. It's so undignified." And then she said something that made the hairs on Nina's arms prickle. "It reminds me of those awful, humid summers back home. Makes your clothes cling like flypaper." Beatrice laughed politely. "I never pictured you enduring humidity, Selena. I always imagined you growing up with central air and servants fanning you." Selena's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Even the finest old homes can have their rustic charms," she said coldly, changing the subject. "Back home." That was the key. Her official biography placed her upbringing in a stone mansion on the city's Gold Coast. But the way she spoke of the heat, the humidity, the clinging clothes, it sounded visceral, it sounded real, and it sounded distinctly Southern. Nina's own family had roots in the South. Her mother was from North Carolina, and her aunt still lived in Georgia. Nina had spent many childhood summers there, and the memory of that oppressive, suffocating humidity was deeply ingrained. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her determined face. The official story was a lie. She was certain. Selena Northwood was hiding something. The question was what? She abandoned the polished society searches and tried a different approach. She started searching for phrases, connections. She tried Selena Beaumont plus Georgia, Selena plus Vassar plus Southern. Nothing. It was like searching for a ghost. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, her mind wandering. She thought of the voice, the lilt in the word common. She thought of the scar. She thought of the impatient drumming of the nails. And then a memory unbidden surfaced. She was 10 years old, visiting her Aunt Carol in a small town just outside Atlanta. They had gone for breakfast at a bustling, noisy Waffle House. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and grease. The waitresses were fast, loud, and efficient, shouting orders to the cooks with their pens tucked behind their ears. There was one waitress in particular who had fascinated her 10-year-old self. She was young, perhaps early 20s, with sharp features and bleached blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was a whirlwind of motion, balancing plates on her arm, her voice cutting through the din. She had a sarcastic, biting wit and complained loudly to the other waitresses about her useless boyfriend and the stingy, non-tipping customers. And she had a nickname everyone yelled at her. "Sina, table 3 needs a waffle now?" And "Hey, Sina, more coffee over here, Sina." Nina's breath caught in her chest. She sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. It was a long shot, a wild, impossible leap of logic, but the memory was so vivid. The impatient way Sina drummed her pen against her order pad as she waited for an order. Tap, tap, tappity, tap. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us continue sharing more narratives like it, please consider donating to Stories of Black Women. Your support ensures we can keep bringing these powerful tales to life. Thank you. The furious red mark of a burn on her wrist from bumping against the grill. The sharp, inflected voice. Could the impeccably polished and terrifying Selena Northwood, heiress to the Beaumont fortune, actually be Senna, the Waffle House waitress from Georgia? It seemed insane, absurd, a fantasy born of sleep deprivation and disgust for a rude customer. But Nina couldn't shake the idea. She opened her laptop again, her fingers flying over the keyboard. This time her search was different. She wasn't looking for a Beaumont. She was looking for a Senna. She typed Waffle House, Senna, Georgia, 1990. The search results were a jumble of nonsense. Too broad. She needed to narrow it down. She tried to remember the name of the town she had visited with her aunt. It was on the tip of her tongue, something with a tree, Oakhaven. She typed Waitress, Oakhaven, Georgia. And there, on the third page of search results, was a link to the digitized archives of a small local newspaper, the Oakhaven Herald. The headline, dated July 1998, read, "Local Waitress Wins Regional Pie Baking Contest." With her heart pounding, Nina clicked the link. The page took a moment to load. The grainy photograph rendered slowly on her screen, and then she saw it. It was an image of 3 women holding pies. The woman in the center smiled widely, holding a trophy. She was younger, her face a little fuller, her hair a shocking blonde, but there was no doubt. It was her, the sharp cheekbones, the determined jawline, and the eyes, the same pale, cold, calculating blue eyes that now gazed with disdain at the city's elite from Table 12 at Aria. The caption beneath the photo read, "Local favorite Selena Senna Kowalski takes first prize for her famous peach pie at the annual county fair. Congratulations, Senna." Selena Kowalski, not Beaumont. Nina leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. The Empress had no clothes, and Nina had just found the store receipts. The discovery of Senna Kowalski from Oak Haven, Georgia, changed everything. Nina now entered Aria, not with fear, but with a quiet, vibrant confidence. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, almost comical understanding. Every glacial stare, every condescending remark from Selena was no longer the sting of a superior being. It was the desperate defense of a woman terrified of being discovered. The Empress was no Empress at all. She was just from Waffle House, playing a part, and her performance was beginning to fray at the edges. Perhaps perceiving a shift in the power dynamic, the subtle way Nina no longer flinched at her gaze, the placid calm in her eyes, Selena escalated her campaign. Her microaggressions became more pronounced, her complaints more frequent and absurd. "This water," she announced one night, pushing her glass away. "It tastes sweet. They're using filtered tap water. I demand bottled water." "It is bottled, Mrs. Northwood," Nina calmly replied. "Fiji, as always." "Then the glass is contaminated. Bring me another." Another night, she claimed her soup was cold despite the visible steam rising from the bowl. She sent it back twice. Antoine, the chef, was furious, but Mr. Coleman appeased him, his face a mask of tense diplomacy. Selena was trying to get Nina fired, and was becoming less subtle about it. Preston Northwood, for his part, was beginning to look less oblivious and more concerned. He started observing the interactions between his wife and the waitress. He saw Selena's growing agitation, her increasingly erratic complaints. He noted the steady, unnerving calm with which Nina met every challenge. One night, after Selena accused Nina of having undercharged them by $10 on a bill over $1,000, a quick recount proved her wrong. Preston lingered behind as his wife swept out. "I apologize for my wife," he told Nina quietly, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient weariness. "She's been under a lot of stress lately." "No problem, Mr. Northwood," Nina said, her expression unreadable. The apology seemed to enrage Selena further. Her next visit was with her social rival, Beatrice Langdon. It was clear from the outset that Selena was performing for Beatrice, demonstrating her power within Aria's walls. She was more demanding than ever. "The lighting at this table is simply dreadful," Selena declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "It's casting the most unflattering shadows. You," she said, snapping her fingers at Nina, "get the manager to do something about it." Mr. Coleman rushed over, wringing his hands. "Mrs. Northwood, I am so sorry. The lighting is centrally controlled." "Then uncontrol it," she snapped. "I will not dine in a cave." As Mr. Coleman scrambled to find a solution, Nina continued serving them, her movements fluid and calm. Beatrice watched the entire exchange with a small, amused smile, which only fueled Selena's ire. It was then that the memory that would become Nina's ultimate weapon fully crystallized. The pie contest photo had confirmed Senna's identity, but Nina's subconscious was still unearthing details from that distant Waffle House breakfast. She remembered a sudden, tremendous crash, a collective gasp followed by stunned silence, then an eruption of laughter. Senna, the waitress, had been trying to impress her manager, or perhaps just show off. She had loaded a tray with an impossible number of plates, at least a dozen, full of pancakes, hash browns, and eggs. She tried to hoist it onto her shoulder with an arrogant grin, but her foot slipped on a patch of melted butter on the linoleum floor. The result was a breakfast food catastrophe. The tray went flying, plates shattered, pancakes sailed through the air like greasy frisbees. A mountain of hash browns and scrambled eggs landed squarely in the lap of a portly, important-looking man in a suit. The man, red-faced and sputtering, sprang to his feet. Nina now remembered someone shouting his name. Councilman Miller. Senna, covered in syrup and shame, her face bright red, did not apologize. She stood among the wreckage, put her hands on her hips, and yelled a phrase so crude and unladylike it became a local legend, a phrase Nina's aunt repeated with a giggle for years afterward. "Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit," Cinna had yelled, her Georgia accent thick as molasses. "Guess y'all wanted a sample of the floor." The memory was so clear, so perfect. It was the ultimate piece of ridicule. It wasn't just that Selina Northwood had once been a Waffle House waitress named Cinna Kowalski. It was that she had been a clumsy, hot-tempered, infamous waitress. This knowledge settled inside Nina like a heavy, powerful secret. She had no intention of using it. To do so would be cruel, a weapon of social mass destruction. She would keep it to herself, a private source of amusement and armor against Selina's attacks. She believed that simply knowing the truth was enough. She was wrong. Selina, sensing her power over Nina waning and her husband's patience wearing thin, decided she needed to end this. She needed this quiet, irritating waitress permanently removed from her sight and planned to do so in the most public, humiliating way possible. The stage was set for their final confrontation. A week later, the Northwoods were hosting an exclusive small dinner for a potential business partner of Preston's, a Japanese investor named Mr. Tanaka and his wife. It was a crucial meeting. The deal was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Selina had personally called Mr. Coleman to ensure every detail was impeccable and had made a specific, chilling request. "I want the new girl, Nina, to serve my table," she had said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I want her closely watched. I want to see if she has the goods." Mr. Coleman had warned Nina. "She's setting a trap, Riley. Be careful. One wrong move tonight, and she'll have you fired before the appetizers are cleared." Nina simply nodded. "I understand." She knew it wasn't a test. It was an execution. And Selina Northwood had just handed her the axe. Before the night of the crucial dinner, Nina felt the need to solidify her position. Not for herself, but for certainty. A grainy newspaper photo and a childhood memory were powerful, but still somehow ephemeral. She needed something more concrete, a final link in the chain that connected Cinna Kowalski to Selina Northwood. She called the only person who could provide it, her Aunt Carol. "Aunt Carol, it's Nina," she began, pacing her small apartment. "Do you remember years ago, when I was a kid, you took me to a Waffle House in Oakhaven?" Carol laughed. "Heavens, sweetie, I've probably taken you to a dozen Waffle Houses. Which one are you talking about?" "This one was memorable," Nina said. "There was a waitress, everyone called her Senna, bleached blonde hair, a real spitfire. There was an incident with a lot of breakfast plates, and a local politician." Aunt Carol let out such a loud peal of laughter that Nina had to pull the phone away from her ear. "My goodness, you remember Cinna Kowalski?" "Of course I remember Cinna. That girl was an Oakhaven legend for about 6 months. The hash brown toss, they called it. Poor Councilman Miller smelled like fried potatoes for a week. Cinna was so embarrassed, she barely showed her face for days." Nina's hand tightened on the phone. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us continue sharing more narratives like it, please consider donating to Stories of Black Women. Your support ensures we can keep bringing these powerful tales to life. Thank you. "What happened to her, Aunt Carol? Do you know?" "Well, that's the thing," Carol said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "She was always talking about getting out, about being somebody. Said Oakhaven was too small for her ambitions, saved every penny she earned. Then, about a year after the hash brown incident, she just vanished. Poof, overnight, packed her bags and left. Nobody ever heard from her again." Carol paused and continued. "Some said she went to California to be an actress. Others said she ran off with some rich fella passing through town. Her mama was heartbroken. Senna never called." "What was her ambition?" Nina asked quietly. "Rich," Carol said without a moment's hesitation. "She didn't care how, she just wanted to be stinking rich. Used to read all those fancy magazines, Town and Country and such. Practiced talking like the people in the movies, trying to lose her accent. We all thought it was a joke. 'Senna's gonna be a big lady someday,' we'd tease." The final piece clicked into place. The years of elocution lessons to erase the accent, the fabricated history of a blue blood Beaumont, the obsessive, desperate need to control her environment and belittle service staff, the very people she used to be. It was all a defense mechanism, a fortress built to protect her fragile new identity from the ghost of Cinna Kowalski. "Nina, sweetie, why on earth are you asking about Cinna Kowalski after all these years?" Aunt Carol asked, her curiosity piqued. Nina took a deep breath. I think I just met her, Aunt Carol. She offered no further details, and mercifully her aunt didn't press. After hanging up, Nina felt a strange mix of emotions. There was compassion for the ambitious young woman, so ashamed of her roots she would erase her entire life. But there was also a cold resolve. Selina had used her new identity not just to ascend, but to crush others. She had become a high-class bully, using her fabricated status to inflict the very shame and humiliation she must have feared for herself. Nina now understood that Selina's cruelty wasn't born of strength, but of a deep, ingrained weakness. Her fear of being exposed as Senna Kowalski was the engine of her malice. With this confirmation, Nina no longer saw the upcoming dinner as a trap. She saw it for what it was, a stage. Selina had built the set, sent the invitations, and cast the actors. She intended Nina to be the tragic flaw, but Nina had just rewritten the script. She would not be the victim in this play. She walked into Aria that night feeling an uncanny calm. She carefully polished the silverware for table 12, arranged the flowers with precision, and decanted the aged Bordeaux Preston had pre-ordered. Every action was precise, deliberate. Mr. Coleman pulled her aside just before the guests arrived. "Riley, listen to me," he pleaded, his face sweaty. "Don't give her any ammunition. Be perfect. Be invisible. Just get through tonight." "Don't worry, Mr. Coleman," Nina said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "Everything is under control." When she saw the Northwoods arrive with their distinguished guests, Nina felt the last vestiges of fear evaporate. She saw Selina resplendent in a silk gown, diamonds glittering, greeting Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka with impeccable, practiced grace. She looked every bit the city's grand dame, but Nina didn't see Selina Northwood. She saw Senna Kowalski, Oak Haven, Georgia, and could almost smell the faint scent of hash browns and fear. The dinner began with a tense, theatrical perfection. Selina was in her element, playing the part of the consummate hostess. She steered the conversation with effortless charm, speaking knowledgeably about Japanese art with Mrs. Tanaka and discussing global markets with Mr. Tanaka, all while subtly controlling the flow of service with a flick of her eyes or a slight tilt of her head. Nina moved around the table like a ghost, her service impeccable. She filled wine glasses before they emptied, cleared plates with silent efficiency, and anticipated every need. It was so flawless that her very perfection seemed an act of defiance, which only irritated Selina further. The trap wasn't springing because the prey refused to make a mistake. Selina waited, her patience wearing thin. She needed a flaw, a crack in Nina's composure that she could exploit. Her moment, she decided, would come with the coffee service after the main course. It was a simple part of the meal, making any error all the more glaring. The main courses were cleared. The deal between Preston and Mr. Tanaka seemed to be going well. The atmosphere was convivial. It was the perfect time for Selina to strike. "Waitress!" her voice snapped, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. The table fell silent. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka looked up in surprise. Preston shot his wife a warning glance. "Yes, Mrs. Northwood," Nina responded, stopping beside her. Selina pointed to her husband's half-empty wine glass. "My husband's glass has been empty for nearly 5 minutes. We are attempting to conduct a business dinner here, and your inattentiveness is a distraction. Is this the level of service Aria offers now?" It was a blatant lie. Nina had just topped off Preston's glass moments earlier. He had taken a large sip, but it was far from empty. It was a manufactured error, a flimsy excuse. "My sincerest apologies, Mrs. Northwood," Nina said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I will be more vigilant." "Vigilance is the very least," Selina countered, her voice rising. She could sense victory was near. She was going to break this impertinent girl in front of everyone. "Perhaps this position is simply too demanding for you. Some people just aren't cut out for high-end service." She looked around the table, a sneer on her face. "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, after all." The insult hung in the air, ugly and cutting. Mr. Coleman, who had been hovering nearby, started to advance, his face ashen. Preston opened his mouth to intervene, a rare flash of anger in his eyes, but Nina raised a hand, a small, subtle gesture to stop them. Nina looked directly at Selina, and for the first time, did not look away. She smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, but a small, knowing, and utterly devastating one. She leaned in slightly, as if sharing a secret, but spoke clearly enough for the entire table to hear. Her voice was soft, conversational, and stripped of all deference. "You're right. Nina said. But you sure can try, can't you, Senna? The name dropped with the force of a physical blow. The color drained from Selina's face. Her carefully constructed mask of aristocratic boredom shattered, replaced by raw, naked panic. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open slightly. Preston stared at her in confusion. Senna? Nina's gaze did not waver from Selina's. I'm sorry, her voice continued, still gentle. I just feel I should know how to serve you better. I just keep imagining you in your old uniform. It must be so much harder to balance things in heels than those comfy sneakers you used to wear. Selina was speechless, frozen. She looked like a cornered animal. Beatrice Langdon, who was at a nearby table and had been watching the drama with keen interest, leaned forward, her ears practically wiggling. Nina delivered the final blow. Especially after that awful spill you had, she said, with a touch of feigned sympathy in her tone. All those plates. It was such a terrible mess. Poor Councilman Miller. All those hash browns. She paused, letting the words sink in. I must say, your line back then was a classic. What was it? Oh, yes. Nina's voice adopted a slight, almost perfect Georgia accent. Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit. I guess y'all wanted a sample of the floor. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. It was broken by a single sharp sound, a choked gasp from Beatrice Langdon, who quickly covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka exchanged bewildered glances, understanding only that a colossal social drama was imploding before their eyes. Preston Northwood stared at his wife, an expression of horror and comprehension dawning on his face. He wasn't looking at the elegant socialite he had married. He was seeing the cheap dye job, the Waffle House uniform, the years of lies. He was seeing Senna Kowalski, but the most devastating reaction came from Selina herself. The terror in her eyes morphed into pure, unbridled fury. But it was the fury of the powerless. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us continue sharing more narratives like it, please consider donating to Stories of Black Women. Your support ensures we can keep bringing these powerful tales to life. Thank you. She had been exposed. The secret she had spent 20 years and millions of dollars burying had just been unearthed, with a handful of words by a waitress she had tried to destroy. Selina pushed away from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her movements were clumsy, ungainly. All her practiced grace had vanished. She opened her mouth to scream, to deny, to say anything, but only a strangled squeak emerged. Without another word, she turned and fled. She did not sweep out majestically. She ran, a panicked, stumbling, awkward flight past stunned customers and gaping staff, her silk dress trailing behind her like a deflated flag. The Empress had been dethroned. The guillotine was empty, and in the stunned silence of Arya, Nina Riley stood perfectly still, holding an empty coffee pot, her expression calm, her work finally done. The silence Selina left in her wake was deeper than any sound. It was a void that sucked all the air and noise from Arya's opulent room. Customers who had been pretending not to look now openly stared, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka looked at Preston with expressions of deep, sympathetic embarrassment. Their 9-figure deal was suddenly the least important thing in the room. The staff stood like statues, their professional composure shattered by the raw humanity of the scene they had just witnessed. Nina remained at the table, the silver coffee pot still in her hand. The adrenaline that had surged during the confrontation began to fade, leaving behind an odd, hollow calm. She had done it. She had pulled the pin on a grenade she didn't know she was holding until the very last second. Looking at Preston Northwood's face, a mask of horror and betrayal, she felt not a victor's triumph, but a solemn sense of finality. This wasn't just the end of a night, it was the end of a life, an identity meticulously constructed over 2 decades, now lying in ruins on the expensive carpet. Preston was the first to move. Slowly, he folded his napkin, placing it beside his plate with a precision that seemed utterly surreal. He rose, his tall frame seemed hunched and weary. Mr. Tanaka, Mrs. Tanaka, he said, his voice raspy. I believe this concludes our evening. My deepest apologies. He gave Nina a long, unreadable look. He wasn't angry, he wasn't grateful, he was simply stripped bare. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant, not running like his wife, but moving with the heavy, defeated shuffle of a man who had just discovered the foundations of his world were made of satin. The spell broke. A low murmur erupted in the room, the sound of gossip being born in real time. Beatrice Langdon was already furiously typing on her phone, her face lit with the malicious joy of a social predator who had just witnessed the alpha's downfall. The story of Selena's fall was already exiting the building before her car had even left the curb. Within a day, the whispers became a roar. Beatrice's carefully curated texts had spread the juiciest details among the city's elite. The story was told and retold at tennis clubs, boardroom lunches, and in the hushed drawing rooms of the wealthy. It was a spectacular, irresistible scandal. The city's most feared woman, the Empress of Ice and Old Money, was a sham. The Beaumont heiress was Senna Kowalski from Oakhaven, Georgia. Cruel, mocking nicknames sprang up overnight. The Hash Brown heiress, the Waffle House Cena, the fear she had so meticulously cultivated vanished, replaced by the one thing her fragile ego could not bear: public ridicule. Her social execution was absolute. Gala invitations rescinded, her name was quietly removed from the boards of the charities she dominated. Friends who once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. She had built her entire world on a pedestal of perceived superiority, and overnight, Nina had kicked it out from under her. The final, private confrontation happened in the cold, marble foyer of the Northwood mansion. The house felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Selena, her face pale and swollen from crying, tried to defend herself. She wove a tale of ambition, of wanting a better life, of doing what was necessary. She blamed Nina, calling her a jealous, vengeful nobody who sought to destroy her. Preston listened through it all, his expression unmoving. When she finished, her angry, self-pitying words echoing in the vast space, he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, devoid of the fury she expected. It was worse. It was empty. "I don't care that you were a waitress, Senna," he said, using her old name, a final, deliberate cut. "My father was a mechanic. I started my first company with a loan and a garage. You think I care where you came from?" He shook his head, a look of profound sadness in his eyes. "What I care about is the lie. For 20 years, our life has been a performance. I see it now. I see all of it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That young waiter you had fired because you said his cologne was offensive. He just reminded you of some boy you knew in Oakhaven. That charity for underprivileged students you refused to fund, you feared seeing yourself in their faces. All that cruelty, all that venom, it was never about them, was it? It was about you. You were so terrified someone would find out about Senna Kowalski that you spent every day trying to kill her over and over, hurting people who reminded you of her." He looked around him at the opulent, loveless house they had built together. "I can't live in this mausoleum anymore. I can't live with the woman you became to protect a secret I would never have judged you for." The divorce was swift and private. Preston was more than fair with the settlement, but the one thing she couldn't have was his name, or his protection. Selena Northwood ceased to exist. Senna Kowalski, now rich but utterly alone, vanished from the city, retreating into the reclusiveness she once faked for her imaginary family. Back at Aria, the change was palpable. It was as if a perpetually gray sky had finally cleared. The tension that used to seize the staff from the moment they walked in was gone. Laughter could be heard from the kitchen. Mr. Coleman was seen smiling, an expression so rare his facial muscles seemed to strain with the effort. The staff no longer walked on eggshells, and the service, paradoxically, became even better, warmer, more genuine. Nina became a reluctant icon. The staff treated her with a new level of reverence, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. One evening, Leo cornered her as they prepped for the dinner rush. "I have to say, Nina, I've seen a lot in my 10 years here," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I've seen chefs throw plates, customers throw tantrums, and marriages crumble over a bottle of wine. But I've never seen anything like this. You didn't just run a rude customer off, you liberated a kingdom." Nina offered a small, tired smile. "It wasn't a kingdom, Leo. It was just a very sad, very scared woman in a gilded cage." The victory, however, felt complicated. She had won, but the battle left a strange taste in her mouth. She had exposed a lie, yes, but she had also completely dismantled a person's life. Watching Selena flee the restaurant, stripped of all her power and dignity, didn't feel like justice. It felt like a tragedy. Nina realized with striking clarity that she didn't want to be a part of this world, this theater of power, wealth, and profound insecurity. A few months after the incident, she submitted her resignation to Mr. Coleman. Her savings account was healthy, and her path was clear. She was re-enrolling in college to finish her degree in psychology. She was no longer content to just observe human behavior. She wanted to understand it. She wanted to know why people build such elaborate fortresses around their hearts, and what it takes to help them find the courage to step outside. Her last night at Aria was filled with a warmth that would have been unimaginable just months before. Chef Antoine, a man who had lived in terror of Selena's palate, prepared a special tasting menu for her. "For you," he said, presenting a dish with a flourish. "I cook with a light heart for the first time in years." The staff gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal. Inside the cover, in a dozen different handwritings everyone had signed. The main inscription, written in Mr. Coleman's neat hand, read, "To Nina, the quiet giant slayer, thank you for reminding us that the best service is done with dignity." As she stepped out of Aria for the last time, the cool night air felt clean. She thought of Selena, or rather, Senna Kowalski. She hoped that somewhere, stripped of her false identity, she would begin the difficult work of building a real one that didn't require cruelty as a shield. But she knew that wasn't her story to write. Hers was just beginning, a path that led not towards wealth or status, but towards understanding. She had come to Aria looking for a job, but she left with a purpose: to understand the intricate, fragile, and often hidden truths that make us who we are. And so, the reign of Selena Northwood ended not with a bang, but with the devastating, quiet whisper of a name: Senna. This story is a powerful reminder that the most intimidating facades are often the most fragile, built on a foundation of deep insecurity. People who build their thrones on the fear of others are often the most fearful of all, terrified that one day someone will see them for who they truly are. Nina had no money or status, but she had the truth. And in the end, truth was the only weapon that mattered. Have you ever known someone like Selena, who used their power to make others feel small? Or have you been a Nina, silently observing, knowing there was more to the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated and you believe in the power of truth to overcome tyranny, no matter how small the kingdom, show your support. Click the like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story of real-life drama and poetic justice. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories about the hidden lives and secret dramas playing out around us every day. Thank you for listening.